Good morning. My name is Ann Swain. I'm the CEO of APSCo, and I want to welcome you to Question Time Live on Tuesday, the 12th of May. I have an amazing panel with me, and I'd like to welcome them and to thank them for their time, and let's hope their openness and honesty about what the situation is currently within their businesses and any views that they've got on the rest of the market. I'd like to welcome Colin Monk. Colin Monk is the Director of Operations for Manpower Group UK. Colin's been in the market for a very long period of time with some senior positions in some of the good and great businesses out there. He has, in the Workforce Solution Group of Manpower, if we look at it, having been set up over 70 years ago, not by Colin himself, I would say. The Workforce Solution Group actually is in over 80 countries and has about 400,000 customers, ranging from those in the public sector to other large organisations as well as much smaller companies. But obviously Manpower have a range of niches and work across the board. And I'm looking at quizzing Colin on what's happening in some of these different sectors, but specifically what the flavour of the market is out there. I would also like to introduce Gareth Morris. Gareth is somebody we've known very well for a long period of time at APSCo. He's one of the two founders and he's the CEO of Evolution Recruitment Services. We just call them Evolution at APSCo, and we know them very well because they are in both the UK, Germany, Australia and also Singapore, have around 160 members of staff and work specifically in that technical environment, both IT and some of the technical engineering areas, have grown pretty rapidly actually, although it is interesting to think that they're new kids on the block, but actually they were formed in 2000, so not quite as new, but it feels fresh as though they are. We also have Tania Bowers. Tania Bowers, you I'm sure are aware, is the APSCo legal counsel, and Tania will answer those questions, and there's been a lot of them of late, with regard to some of the changes from a legislation point of view or guidance that's coming out on a daily basis and sometimes hourly basis and sometimes confusing basis, to be perfectly honest. So Tania will look at clarifying some of the guidance that's coming out and make sure that you are kept in the know as to what you should do, what you can do, and what maybe we are all going to be doing as we move forward. Why don't I get on to asking Tania really just to give us a little bit of update, if that's all right. Talking about guidance, I know only yesterday, and I think it was late on in the evening, there has been some guidance released on how people in different sectors, or maybe our customers' sectors, can in fact get back into the workforce and what they need to do from a health and safety point of view. Can you just give us a little bit of clarity on that, Tania?
Yes, so we've been waiting for guidance on 8 different types of work locations. We know that they have been in discussion with unions, etc., over a week or so. So they're now online, so we'll make sure we put a link to them up on the hub. There's obviously one for an office location, which is relevant to most APSCo members, but there's also health and safety guidance on running a construction site, running a factory environment. I've looked at the office one. I haven't had time to look at all of them. They're very much checklist based. No real surprises because they've been widely talked about in the press. It's the sort of thing you'd expect: split teams, continuing to work from home if at all possible, but if they are in the office, positioning desks, all of that stuff, use of plexiglass, entry and exit points being different, lots of education about hand washing. I think what they're trying to do is not hang employers out to dry. They use terminology such as every reasonable effort, acceptable levels of risk. And there's also what might be useful, particularly for smaller businesses who might not have used these before. There's links to the health and safety website where there's interactive risk assessment tools, which actually I think will be really quite useful for a lot of our members to run through. So yeah, that's the latest.
So with our members, there's some fairly clear guidelines. A lot of them are going to be quite common sense about how to get their staff back in the office when the time comes, because pretty obviously a lot of we can do from home. What about when people are putting temporary or agency workers or contractors on site? Are you finding that the guidance is including those, or is it just aimed at workers or employees?
Helpfully, because I do know the employment agency standards have spent a lot of time looking at this guidance over the last week or so. Certainly the one about offices refers to people in your environment, workers in your environment. It makes very clear that the employer has an obligation towards anybody that is working in the environment or visits the environment, which is actually really helpful, because all too often in government guidance, they talk about employees, even though they mean workers as well. So that's actually very helpful that they've not used the word employee, actually, I think.
Yeah, good. Well, that makes it much clearer for us. And when we're putting staff out in different places and temporary workers out or contractors out in different places, we need that. Colin, can I come to you? A broad question, really. How are things going for Manpower in the UK and Ireland?
Yeah, so thanks very much, and thanks very much indeed for inviting me on this morning, by the way, and hi to everyone. Nice to meet you, so to speak, although it's some of the times we're doing it virtually more and more these days. So specifically to your question, Anne, what one would say, I suppose the word challenging is probably an apt one, and is probably true of all of us, regardless of size of operation, perhaps the sector that we specialise in, or indeed for whereabouts in the UK or more further afield as well, if you're running international operations as well. But challenging is the key. The other thing I would also say there is one of optimism. I'm optimistic, and I've been hugely impressed and surprised by all the people that I'm privileged to lead and work with in the UK operations, around the sheer level of optimism around opportunity, around a sense of service as well. In terms of looking after our temp workers particularly, as well as our colleagues in the workforce. And of course, with that provides a sense of change, but a sense also of adventure and how we might actually make possibility and take things forward in a slightly different way for both clients and our candidates alike. So it's not one which I can fully understand has been such a terrible situation that we've all been involved with over the last couple of months. But really then very quickly, the sense of robustness and rebound and sense of pragmatism of how to deal with this very, very difficult set of times, both on a personal basis, but also collectively as an organisation, and also those in terms, as I said, of our service to our workers, our candidates and our clients. How do we get the very best for them? How do we make sure, for instance, that where we can retain their earnings? How can we ensure that there is a level of where we can stability in the way that people go about their daily working life? And where there isn't that sense of stability, how can we bring some of that aspect back into someone's life in doing so? And of course, everything that our workers, our clients have felt, we have felt too. You know, I'm going to be very candid. We have furloughed people within our organisation. We have had to. We have had to do more than essentially one round of furloughing as well. And that's important to understand, that this isn't something that, you know, we have seen as an observer within our clients or indeed with our candidates. This is very much a sense of we have felt the same situation too. And of course, we've also seen the differences of how sectors have behaved within the UK. So this is a very real experience for us, both in terms on a personal level and also in terms of our professional services. But what I am absolutely convinced of is that it's been very much a sense of partnership with our clients and our workers to try and get the very best from this situation, not so much in terms of dealing with the sheer emergency that we all faced over a few weeks, but actually, and more importantly, a sense of how do we come out of this. And although we are very fixed, and rightly, on certainly the news of the last few days about how we are going to get back to work, how do we get some sense of new norm? The reality of it is, I think the moment we were faced with this crisis, very shortly afterwards, I think we all started thinking about what is going to happen next and how do we deal with it. So this is just essentially the fruition of perhaps what many of us have been thinking for many weeks already.
Yeah, thank you. Gareth, if I come to you, is it better to be a sort of medium-sized business in a niche? And IT is always a good niche, let's face it. But is it better to be agile and in a niche, or better to be somebody like Manpower that has businesses spread across all different sectors?
Well, I suppose if you're a diverse business, then you mitigate some of your risk. But I can certainly comment on our sector, IT and technical engineering, to say I think we're very lucky to be in that sector. So because of the nature of the roles that the people that we're placing, the nature of the roles they do, they can work from home. So I've been pleasantly surprised by the number of clients that are still prepared to do remote interviews via Zoom or Skype, and then actually offer jobs and get people started remotely from home. So it's certainly there's more demand out there than I perhaps thought there would be at the start of this. And so from our perspective, I think we're very lucky being in the sector we're in. It's difficult to comment on other sectors because we just don't operate in that space.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, look, teaching, that whole educational sector dropped off a cliff, but again, is picking up a bit. How are you finding perm compared to contract, Gareth?
We're personally finding contract more challenging. It appears that new projects starting are pretty thin on the ground, but companies that have struggled to hire perhaps over the last 2 or 3 years because of the skill shortages in IT and engineering are now actually seeing this as an opportunity. So if people are brave enough to recruit and to hire, they are going to get really good value for money. They're going to get really good people that perhaps wouldn't have joined their organization a few months ago, and the salaries that they're looking for are perhaps a little bit more realistic than they were 3 months previously.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? And of course, Evolution is a business, as I said earlier on, that's spread into different countries. Are you seeing a similar flavour in Germany, for instance?
Germany's been challenging for us because the employment legislation in Germany very much favours the employee, not the employer. And once you've served 6 months in a business in Germany, it's very, very difficult for that business to make you redundant or to move you out of the business. So it appears that candidates on a permanent front are very reticent about moving jobs because they know they're going to go into a new company, and in the first 6 months of their employment, they don't really have any employment rights. So it's making people quite cautious about moving jobs. So yeah, that's the feedback from our German business, that the permanent has been challenging, not necessarily because of the demand from the client side, but because candidates are nervous about moving jobs at this time.
Which makes sense, doesn't it? Okay, let me go to some questions from our audience out there. And let's see. Any tips from the panel in keeping the furloughed members of staff that you have actually motivated and still feeling part of the team? Colin, what are you doing at Manpower to keep those furloughed workers? You mentioned you have some. In touch without allowing them to do any work, of course.
Yes, indeed. Absolutely right. So we saw it, I'll come back to that phrase opportunity, or the word opportunity I used before. We saw it as absolutely critical that these are our workers, they are our colleagues, and that's the most important aspect here. Unfortunately, we cannot have them at work, as you mentioned, and they're not going to be engaged in work practices for a period of time. But of course, what that does give, and we have often made available the opportunity to learn and develop as not only a sense of skill, but also in areas where actually they may have decided or have a desire to look at future career options. And so we have put very large learning and development packages in place, very diverse packages, so that there is a sense of interest and personal investment in terms of what happens next and how they may well be better set to coming and dealing with some of those challenges. That is the first thing. So there's a professional skill set, learning and development package, if you like. But also, I think we also have to recognise some of the perhaps more emotional challenge of being in furlough. and some of that situation where work plays a huge part in all of our lives, and suddenly that has changed that situation. So within that, there is certainly a feature around mental health and how to deal with some of the mental challenges, emotional challenges that people have gone through, not just from the point of view of work balance, life balance, dealing with children's schooling, for instance. Many of us have had to deal with some of those aspects more recently. How to deal also with working from home and some of the tech challenges involved with that, some of the frustrations around that, particularly if one's skill sets are not particularly attuned to working in that way and learning in that way as well. And then also we've dealt with some of the pieces around how can one deal with grief and emotional stress. And under COVID-19, we have obviously seen large instances of that, both within our internal workforce, but also with our temp workforce. So essentially that has been, if you like, the support aspects that we have been able to provide our furloughed staff. And then also there's got a bit of fun coming around as well. And we've got to try and get some light-hearted, good, British sense of humour attached to how we go about things. And so we've seen some fantastic quizzes going on. We've seen some phenomenal hashtag invented type themes going on. Very recently, we saw some really great VE celebrations going on in celebrations. We've seen some huge talent shows actually going on as well with regards to, I wouldn't say the singing so much, but certainly some fantastic quiz making and actually some poetry reciting as well and all sorts. So a little bit of light-hearted life around Manpower Group, and learning languages has been another, and then a few on-the-spot type truth sessions as well have been really good fun, and see how truth or dare actually wins the day, or whether or not it's getting too close for comfort. So we've done a whole variety of things.
Wow. So Gareth, I need to ask you, what are you doing with regards to looking after your fellow people, but giving them perhaps a bit of fun as well? I'm wondering if talent competitions are including your grade 2 piano level, or maybe not.
Yeah,
what are you doing?
Do you know what? I think human contact is really, really important. And I think what we've noticed since everyone's been working from home, that a video call is far better than a phone call. So what we're making sure is that we've got rhythms and routines, and that everyone who's on furlough gets a video call with our HR manager every week. So just the ability to talk to someone, to see how they're doing, see how they're getting on, but also with their direct manager. And every person that's on furlough is invited to every company-wide meeting and any team meetings, so they can still dip in and communicate with the colleagues. And as Colin said, for a bit of fun, we've got our Friday pub quiz, and again, people are invited to that. But when the furlough scheme first started, we put together a furloughed workers resource centre on our intranet, and really just encourage people to think about what they wanted to do from a personal and professional development perspective, so that they had a purpose. So to me, it doesn't really matter if they don't want to practice and work on the recruitment skills. If they want to learn a foreign language, that's great. And then if we touch base with them on a weekly basis, just ask, how are you getting on? How are you doing with that? Because people have got to have a reason to get up in the morning and a purpose to their life, even if it isn't learning more about the regulations in contract recruitment.
Well, the only thing I was saying, I think you're absolutely right. I always have a problem with my staff, and we haven't furloughed very many people, but the sales team realistically. But whenever I give them a call to catch up, they're all thinking I'm about to sack them because it's me. It's a bit like whenever I call anyone to my office, they're all afraid, even though I'm just trying to be friendly. Yeah. What I would say, and remind anyone who's listening to this, that APSCo's Compliance Plus Recruiter training program is an online delivered training program, and it is about contract law and about recruitment law and about what people can and can't do in the recruitment market. We were due to launch that in March, and it would have been sold at a price, but we're giving it away free of charge for members for furloughed staff it's really good. So if you want some, you can have some. APSCo members can have them and use them if they have furloughed staff that would be useful for them, to make sure they understand what's required of them. And it sounds pretty dullard. I'm telling you, it's really great. We've got actors in it. We created it with the help of Recruitment Juice. It looks great. So if anyone wants it for their staff, just speak to moya.ryland@apsco.org, and she will make sure that you have them for your staff. Let me come on then to some other questions. Let me see what we've been asked. There's been, let me just have a look. What view is going to have, if we look at when the furlough scheme ends, if we don't have enough activity to keep everybody employed, can I still make redundancies that would affect the recruitment businesses? And so can I make redundancies after people come back from furlough? Tania, can I come to you?
Yes. Well, I mean, primarily, obviously, the furlough scheme was there to encourage people to not have to make redundancies. And the Chancellor's going to make an announcement probably, well, at some point this afternoon, on what he intends after June. It's likely that there's going to be a sliding decrease in the government assistance rather than sort of just turning the tap off. So that might help. However, if at the end of all that there is not enough activity for individuals, then yes, you can make redundancies, but employment law's still up and running, so you do have to make them fair. You have to look at, if you're going to make more than 20 people redundant, then you need to go through a collective consultation process, which has timelines. ACAS is very useful for the guidance on that, or our help desk, but even for anyone, you have to go through an individual consultation process and look at alternative roles, etc., just as you would normally.
Okay. Can I ask Tania another question for you? Can I insist on furlough workers taking holiday whilst they're on furlough?
Yes, you can, as long as you do, again, comply with standard holiday law, which means you have to give at least twice the notice of the period you want them to take on holiday. And remember that during holiday periods, which include bank holidays, which we've had quite a few recently, you do need to top up the pay. So it's a top up the pay to 100%.
Okay, great. I'm just going to give one more to you, Tania, because it's a specific one. Does the government guidance, say that vulnerable people can refuse to go back to work?
Well, I mean, this is very difficult. I mean, there's extremely vulnerable people who should not be expected to go back into a workplace anytime soon. The general guidance is for vulnerable people, and obviously that includes a lot of people, including people with asthma, etc. If they can work from home, then they should. You should do what you can to ensure that they can work at home. But otherwise, employers can look at what steps or what additional steps they could or should take to make that environment safe for someone who is labelled or labels themselves as vulnerable. And they talk about acceptable levels of risk. But ultimately, no one is obliged to work in an unsafe environment. So I do see this as being a bit of a touch point over the next few months. And I think there is this whole risk of discrimination and treating people differently and collecting data on people that's relevant to health, which normally we wouldn't have to worry about that much. But I think you will, to a certain extent, with some people, have to do a case-by-case assessment of what's an acceptable level of risk for them. To get them back into the workplace if they can't stay up, if there's no way they can work from home.
Gareth, if I come to you, are you starting to make plans with regard to bringing your staff back to the office in the UK?
We're currently working on our COVID risk assessment, and I think there's definitely people who've contacted me that are very keen to return to the office. but equally there's people who I think would struggle due to childcare issues, etc. So for me, we'll cross that bridge when the government say that, yeah, it's okay for office workers to go back to work, and probably be led by what the employee wants to do and what they feel works for them. So the upside of that is if we have a small percentage of people returning back to the office, it allows us to trial the processes that we've put in place before you get everybody back in the fullness of time.
Yeah. How would you think from a public transport point of view? I'm always confused that it's, you know, you have to have social distancing likelihood in the office and wash your hands every 5 minutes, but based in central London, APSCo are, how can you have everybody coming in on the underground or the train or buses? What about you within that space? Are people worried about the idea of coming on public transport?
I think we're very lucky because we're based on a business park, and to be honest, the transport links aren't great, so everyone drives. So there's very, very few people that use public transport, but I completely appreciate if you've got offices in city centres, London, Manchester, Birmingham, it's going to be a big consideration.
Yeah, it is. Let me remind everybody out there, if they want questions answered, get those questions in earlier rather than the later, because otherwise we'd be in a mad rush at the end. Colin, can I come to you? Obviously, Manpower is spread all over, well, all over the world, but if we look specifically at the UK, are you making plans? And if so, what kind of plans are you looking at to get people back to work?
Yeah, so the short answer is absolutely we are. We have been able to take advantage of some of the terrible experiences that our colleagues, particularly in Italy, went through ahead of us, but not exclusively Italy. And we also took advantage of talking to our colleagues further afield in Asia Pac, particularly in Singapore, some of our Australian colleagues, and then obviously further afield around actually in our China operations as well. So yes, that was very educational in terms of what we might need to think about. But equally, of course, each of those governments, those country governments, had very different views as to what was in scope and what wasn't in scope in terms of how recovery to work would look like, and the kind of support that was going to be around that as well. And I completely agree with Gareth, bringing it closer to home in the UK, that without any doubt at all, that there are three key elements that we are totally fixed on at the moment. And the first is around confidence of our employees, and equally confidence of our temporary workers as well, whether they are on site or indeed currently, you know, working from home. But the challenge with that is winning the hearts and minds of that, coupled with also for us in Manpower UK, particularly traveling to city centre environments. Most of our operations, certainly our retail operations, are all city centre locations. And so hearts and minds and confidence in the safety of travelling to work is absolutely paramount. And we don't see a clear strategy there yet. And then the third aspect is also around the way that we would need to operate within our office environments as well. What can we essentially wait on? We are lucky enough to have created a 100% remote working capability now, so there is no sense of rush and urgency of rushing back to a working environment. That said, of course, the other challenge for us is, in terms of diversity of sectors we operate in, is that we do have different needs because of the way that those sectors operate and the demands upon them. So particularly my social care business, which does require quite a different approach to compliance, and therefore different views to how we may deal with our candidate network, our temporary worker network, and also where we do need to be in offices of various functions as well. That then puts different demands and pressures on our workforce, and certainly different worries and concerns. So for us, it may well be that we will look at not only staggering our workforce going back to work by hours and by availability, and Gareth is absolutely right, schooling is undoubtedly one of the pressures, and childcare one of the pressures of how we are practically going to achieve this, but also from the point of view of we may go back by different business units first into the office environment, and then allow us the opportunity to be properly practicing social distancing and also some of the other mitigating factors for infection control, because we can also take advantage of, for instance, our fulfillment operations still being very comfortably able to work from home. So it is a complex picture, not only one around the health and safety requirements, but being very open about it. You know, this is actually about winning confidence of our people and being completely comfortable that our people are safe when they go back to a working environment. And our overall view right now is exactly the same to Gareth, I think, in terms of how he put it. We are not in any rush to go and go through this. You know, we are going to think it through very carefully. And the final point I'd probably add, and this is the learnings that we've got, particularly from our Italian colleagues, is around PPE and the provision of PPE. In Italy particularly, it was very clear around PPE requirements, around temperature testing requirements, and that had been laid down specifically in terms of criteria of returning to work. In some of the other countries in Europe, it is less clear, either because of provision of dealing with it, but also Manpower Group Global had signed very early on, up to, I think with around 400 other global CEOs, a commitment that we would not look to divert the supply chain of PPE to where it is needed perhaps most in our health and care workers. Now, we are still considering that commitment we made versus really the legal requirement or the challenge to provide PPE for our workers, both internally and temps as well. We don't have an outcome to that thought yet. Clearly, where there is a legal requirement in country, Italy being one, we will have to comply, and we are complying. Where we have more freedom to manoeuvre and conversation, we are very, very interested in looking clearly at not only the scientific point of view, but clearly the guidance from governance as well. And I think at the moment that is only just starting to come forward at the moment. And so as I come back to our original point, we're in no hurry to get into the work environment again, and we will be guided by not only clearly the government's view, but clearly also the feeling amongst our staff as well, and whether they feel ready to return to work in that work environment.
And pretty obviously, Manpower have a huge place in the social care market yourselves. Indeed, with temps working in that environment and placing a lot of people in there. Yep. Have you found it difficult to get PPE for your temps and agency workers going out on site?
Yeah, it has been challenging. There's been no two ways about it. And this is very much a partnership aspect between obviously our clients as well. But I have to say, perhaps the greatest challenge actually has been the emotional aspect of our workers, our temp workers, but also Manpower Group staff as well, who are dealing with those. And that is by far been perhaps our overriding concern around how do we actively manage, particularly in a virtual context often, our staff and our temp workers in what actually is, is just becoming to the peak of the crisis in the care sector now, as we are seeing. So mentally, we may all be collectively adjusting ourselves to returning back to a work environment, having gone past the peak. In the care sector particularly, they are just coming out of that phase right now. So that lag and that aspect of reporting and trust in the reporting of where the true peak of that situation has been hugely emotionally draining. And so actually from us, we're dealing with it with a kind of a double aspect here, not only one around PPE and physical protection, but one also around essentially emotional protection and making sure that we've got that longevity there.
Can I ask a question that I suspect is a brief answer? Do you feel that the government and UK PLC, realistically, would have managed to be doing as well as they have done, and some people think it's not as well as it should be, managed to survive with social care if they didn't have recruitment companies such as Manpower and some others, but if they didn't have the recruitment sector providing them with some kind of agile workforce to add value?
So I'll deal with it both from a Manpower and a personal perspective. From a Manpower perspective, I think the answer is clear that temp agencies have played a huge part in helping the very sick and the very the very people in absolute need of help. I mean, I cannot, and I've only been very much party to operations who've been much more closely involved in that day-to-day, and it has been a fight, by the way. I will use the word day-to-day fight to help and assist in a terrible situation for them. What I would say though about it is that recently, under Matt Hancock's provision to start to look at how he might integrate care workers more closely with the NHS. There's been recent talk about further funding. We have engaged with some members of that working party to look at how do we particularly deal with the skill shortage of care workers, either qualified or unqualified, within that sector, not only in the immediate term of dealing with COVID-19, but also actually far beyond that. And how do we actually start to treat this sector once and for all, really, as a genuine profession, and one that has played a massively important part in hopefully what will be our successful outcome to deal with the crisis of COVID-19 as well as we come out of the other side. So we are very fixed in that. We've engaged quite closely with some of those working groups, and we are at the moment also thinking about how do we deal with the chronic issue of skill shortages within care as a whole, and we're fixed through that. On a personal level, I can't even begin to imagine how it must have been in that environment. And certainly talking anecdotally to some of my colleagues who've been dealing with that on a day-to-day basis, undoubtedly that has been perhaps the biggest leadership challenge of all that I faced personally in not only doing the right thing for the business and for our organisation, but also just taking myself out as a personality, as a human being for a second, and saying, guys, that's enough, and you need some time down.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Tania, let me come back to you. We've been waiting with the promise of imminent news and clarification with regard to guidance in relation to annual leave accruing for agency and 0 hours workers. To my memory, we haven't received any yet. Are we still waiting, or did it slide under the door and we didn't notice?
I spoke to Employment Agency Standard yesterday, and I also spoke to another contact at Bays. It's not been published yet, and we think it's just waiting in the queue to be published on gov.uk, so it's very frustrating.
But we're still expecting it, aren't we? There's no backtrack on whether they're going to give us guidance or not.
No, as far as I'm aware, they're still going to publish it. But yes, ACAS updated their holiday leave guidance, but not really materially, and not relevant to agency workers particularly. As I said, what I'm expecting government to say is agency workers and 0 hour workers don't necessarily accrue leave during furlough. It depends what their contracts say as to whether they accrue leave between assignments or when they're not working.
Okay. All right, so we're still anticipating that. And I do understand that we are expecting the Chancellor to speak about the furloughing scenario and look at, there's rumours that that might be extended, or there might be some options from a part-time point of view. Do you have any information whatsoever about that, or any expectations, Tania?
Yeah, I'm not sure of the time, I'm afraid. It's going to be this afternoon sometime. It's been so widely leaked and discussed that there's going to be a sliding scale. I'd be absolutely flabbergasted if it doesn't involve some sort of sliding scale and possibly longer support for certain sectors.
Yeah. We certainly have written to Rishi Sunak to ask whether there could be a sort of part-time scenario on furloughing as an option, which I think should be quite useful, because I think the all or nothing thing doesn't particularly work in an office environment. It obviously works relatively well if you're in the hospitality sector and when there is nothing to be done, whereas it would be a great opportunity, I would have thought, for you to get Gareth recruitment consultants being able to work a half week, and for there being some coverage to help pay the other half of their salary. What do you think? Is that something you would look toward?
Yeah, I think it would certainly make sense. It's interesting that the countries that we operate in, their furlough schemes work in a different way. So, for example, in Singapore, we've got 75% of certain people's salaries being paid. That's Singapore residents and permanent residents, and they are allowed to work. So we get 75% of their salary paid, but they're actually allowed to work 100% of the time. It seems we've gone the other way in the UK, very generous scheme where we can pay 80% of people's salaries, but they absolutely can't work. So I'd certainly like to see something where people can return to work, but there's some assistance in paying their salaries. That would appear to be a win-win for me.
Yeah, what's your view, Colin, with regard to either extending the furlough scheme? I'm hearing rumours, but it's only rumours until September, and that might only be for certain sectors, and or indeed some idea of a sort of part-time furlough scheme. How would you view either of those?
Yeah, so I'm very similar to Gareth here. I think certainly a part-time furlough scheme on a personal level, I think would be a good view. I think from Manpower's point of view, we are keen to consider not only the conversation around how it might be extended. We do see a need for that. We do see a need for it to probably be on the basis not only of sector, but also on the basis of how people can return back to the work environment as well. And that does come back to the childcare piece and safely returning children to schools. So for us, and that is simply down to listening to many of our workers at the moment, both from an internal perspective and also clearly temp workers as well. So we would undoubtedly like to see some connection and understanding, not in isolation of just dealing with, we understand the huge amount of expense that furlough is creating. It is also, though, clearly been hugely important for millions of workers who've been furloughed at the moment. But there has to be some understanding that it has to be in conjunction with perhaps the broader conversation of how do people manage to create an environment to go to work and actually to enable them to go to work as well. And in many cases, transport and childcare / education and how to deal with that are in connection with going to work as well. So to put people into the difficult situation of maybe returning to work part-time, where they may need to be there full-time, not just want to be there full-time into the office environment, but then also not be supported from the point of view of a tapered furlough scheme or a part-time furlough scheme, may then put further stress on an already stressed workforce at the moment. And so for us, we see it as a perhaps not so much of a difficult thing that we haven't seen an answer on this straight away. If it has been a measured response, and furlough comes out this afternoon as a conversation on the back of the 50-page plan that was published earlier on yesterday, and of course the Sunday night conversation, if it's part of a measured drip feed, if you like, into our psyche, then that perhaps is no bad thing to start to bring us into a conversation about life after furlough as it is at the moment. But the reality of it is, if it isn't part of the dialogue over the next few days, we think it will create further unknown and uncertainty, and that is exactly what business doesn't need, including our business at the moment. So we would like some certainty.
Well, that half, if it, say it were, I'm randomly choosing 50% sort of furlough scenario. If it were that, it wouldn't necessarily mean that people needed to come into the office part-time, but maybe they could do some work from home. Whereas at the moment, it's very much an all or nothing, isn't it? We're finding, staff finding it really difficult to keep away, and we have to sort of threaten them to keep them away, with a view that they're not allowed to work. And in the spirit of this generous, I think, scheme, we've made sure that nobody's even kind of smelling work, let alone getting close. But if there were some kind of part-time furlough, it wouldn't necessarily mean coming back to the office. It could mean actually getting, in touch with some people and checking emails realistically and getting involved again, maybe by way of a step process back into getting into things full time.
Well, I agree, and we have to assume that is the case, and I think there's no doubt about that, and that would be the ideal. But what we also don't know is how far down the line businesses are in terms of, frankly, operating on their margins and on their cash, and potentially in their reserves as well. This has not been and will not be a set of trading conditions which have been very favourable for some time now. So I think that is clearly going to enter the conversation around at some point, whether or not there is an affordability piece to this as well.
Yeah. Okay. If talking about the coming back, do you have a view, Colin? And then Gareth, I'm going to come to you as well. But do you have a view of what the rest of the year is going to look like? Are we going to hit that recession? There are some people that think it's going to be a V, we drop down, but we're going to come back pretty instantly. Other people are talking about a Nike kind of tick. And, I sometimes wonder, I suspect not actually, but I do sometimes wonder if it's going to be dropping an old-fashioned leather football on a wet Sunday cold afternoon where it doesn't really bounce much at all, rather than a new lightweight football that's easy to sky when you're taking a penalty, for instance. So if you've looked, obviously the business has looked about the potential and do some risk analysis for a recession. Do you have a view? Do you personally have a view? Do Manpower have a view? UK-wide, but then maybe I'm going to expand that to further afield.
Yeah, so it was a question that was very similarly asked at the investor call to Manpower a couple of weeks ago. So from Manpower's view on that, their view is very clear that they're not going to put a long-term comment to that particular question. What we can say, and I'll take this from a UK perspective now, what we can say is that certain sectors are obviously going to rebound, we think, quicker than others. And also in terms of a recruiting business, I think one of the questions earlier on talked a little bit about the dynamics of the contractor market versus the perm market. And what we can say, if it looks like how we entered this situation at the moment and trading conditions at the moment, the businesses predominantly within Manpower Group are far more affected than our temp and contractor businesses. So on that basis, if we take a view that sectors will come out of this at different rates, and we also believe that that particularly SME, supply chain and innovation-led companies will perhaps rebound quicker than perhaps some of the markets that take longer, if we like, to pick up from inertia. So we take a view that really our temp markets, we would hope to come back at relatively short notice. Also on the basis that we are supporting our clients around not having to make full committed hires as they also recover out of this. So that is our view in terms of the private sector. On a public sector basis, clearly there are some services in the public sector which will be needed to ramp up in order to support not only return to work type initiatives, but actually also to get the country back on its feet and deal with some of the ramifications and aftershocks of COVID-19. So we clearly see some of the public sector demand increasing. And then equally that I also bring that the NHS as well and some of the care services too. And then more specifically around very niche areas of engineering, STEM, and highly skilled areas of production and R&D. This is really us. I think this is going to come down to a sense of longer term investment in the economy. And this is going to be probably answered, we feel, by the sense of stimulus and package stimulus and sense of confidence that the government puts within those areas in order to start to drive forward some of those conversations to invest in R&D and so forth. So that's the uncertain aspect for us. We are seeing that it's been very resilient at the moment as there is a desire to retain very specific talent and skill sets in what are highly niche areas. But clearly there's an affordability aspect to those that if stimulus is not there in the medium to longer term, at some point there will have to be different conversations undoubtedly around innovation projects and programs and how they might well be actioned. So we don't see it as, we're not necessarily considering it as a holistic effect overall, although clearly we're looking for signs around that. What we're trying to see is impact perhaps more micro level in sector and market. and start to consider how that might mitigate some of the length of recovery that may well come as a result of recessions, whatever the shape that they may be.
Okay, thank you. Gareth, let me come to you. I know Evolution well, and I know that you are a business that plan for the future and amazingly well organised on things. So what does your planning look like? What do you feel, firstly, perhaps, what do you feel the economy is going to look like in the UK, and how have you planned for that? And then maybe I'm going to come on to you as to the other countries you're in, Germany, Singapore, Australia. How different do you think a recession or lack of recession is going to look in the future for that?
Yeah, I think a recession is inevitable, to be honest. And looking and reading the Ernst & Young sort of predictions for the UK, they came up with 3 scenarios. The V-shape, where we plummet into a recession and then bounce back out. The W, which is based on going into recession, coming back out, and then being a second wave of infections and going back into recession again. And then the Nike, or the tick-shaped. And I think, having read their report, the tick-shaped recession is the most likely, and I think it's probably going to be 12 months before the economy is back to where it was before we went into this COVID-19 crisis. So
do you see a Tory government, who frankly have been pretty generous,
yeah,
putting as much investment into the country in order to help that tick be not too flat on the long arm of the tick?
Yes, I think they will, because I think this is going to require something akin to the Marshall Plan after World War II. And also I think what occurred with Boris Johnson.
America paid for that, if I mean, I don't remember because it wasn't there, but you know what I mean. America paid for that, didn't they? Is the Tory government going to pay for that?
Absolutely. I think with what happened to Boris Johnson will change him from being a politician to actually potentially being a leader. I think if you come pretty close to losing your life, you're going to gain a bit of perspective. And I think you're seeing that the things that the Tory government are doing, you'd never have thought that a few years ago. So yeah, I'm pretty confident they will do everything they can to support the country coming out of it, and they will invest simply because they've got to.
Okay, if we look at evolution in Germany, in Singapore, in Australia, are you planning for exactly the same kind of outcome, or do you see differences in each of those countries?
Australia doesn't seem to have been affected as badly. There's the number of deaths there is pretty low, and I think we're hoping that Australia comes out of any recession a little bit quicker than the rest of the world. Obviously, Germany's done a fantastic job at managing to keep their number of deaths under control due to the amount of testing that they've done. But the challenge there is, it's the mentality of the German people being reticent about moving jobs because they're very protected if they've been working for a company for over 6 months. In Singapore, the Singapore government's very good in terms of some of the schemes they've put in place to support workers, and I think if they continue to do that, hopefully Singapore will come out of any potential downturn a little bit quicker than perhaps Europe do. So it's a mixed picture. We've just gone for a very, very simple message. So in all our businesses, the goal is to break even in Q2 while remaining solvent. And I would imagine that at the end of Q2, we will roll that on as the goal for Q3 as well. So as long as we're not losing money, as long as we're remaining solvent, then in the short term, we'll regard that as a success. And then at the beginning of each quarter, we'll take stock. Hopefully by Q4, the demand from clients and the opportunity might mean we can be a bit more optimistic and a bit more aggressive and ambitious, and then look to make a profit in Q4.
Okay, if we look at Manpower then, Colin, do you dream of breaking even in this quarter and the following quarter, or are there more demands on you than that?
I think anyone running a business of any size, I think that's the first conversation, isn't it? Where you are in your fiscal security, really. So I'm sure Gareth equally watching a cost base and operating costs as keenly as we are as well. So yes, of course, that is right up there, and then there is that aspect coupled then with okay, so we're very fixed on the here and now, but let's figure out a minute for what got us to be allowed, if you like, permitted to trade for 70 odd years. There are some key values in there which you cannot lose sight of, and equally there are some genuine messages and capabilities that our clients buy from us, if you like, as well. So from our point of view, yeah, of course it is fixing us every minute of every day about how tightly we are managing our business right now. What it does, though, is really concentrate the mind around innovation, not only in terms of how we're operating internally, but also asks the question about the markets we're in and how actually we are going to market, and generally, can we do a better job? Are there better markets for us to be in? Do we need to change the way that we approach those markets? And I think that kind of searching question is really also what we're engaged in right now, thinking about. To give you an example, I've operated in some markets over the last 8 weeks where I can tell you, that is not where our, if you like, our pedigree lies, or our perhaps 70 years of trading history. But the point has been, I think we've all been in that situation over the last 8 weeks. We've been in places where we never thought we would be, or in situations and challenges we never thought we would be asked of us to deal with. And so there's a bit of a leveler there and a bit of a sort of reciter for the business. And I think in those sets of circumstances, that's what I'm fixed on. So of course we're going to stay to our core values and our core markets, but equally we are very, very clear in our mind about how we go to market is going to change. How are we going to, some of the operating models that we traditionally have operated under are clearly going to change. There is real impact around automation for how we are going to, to service some of the demand, and more importantly, the agility to scale up quickly when we do get that sustained rebound. So I think Gareth's absolutely right. Having short-term goals is absolutely where we are now, but we are not prepared to do is lose sight of some of the things that have allowed us to trade for so long, and some of the values that people have bought into, both internally and from our client base as well. So those will be the constants that come out.
Gareth, the culture of evolution is very strong. Do you feel confident that the culture of that business that lies with you and Nick and running it, and also the talent that you have in that team, will survive just as the culture, not the business, that's obviously going to survive and thrive afterwards, but do you feel the culture will be the same moving forward as we come out of this crisis?
I've been so proud with the way everybody in the business has responded to this challenge. And we did a survey using an employee engagement tool called Peakon, which we've done a number of times in the past. And it was actually related to COVID-19. And the overall score that we achieved as a business was 8.9 out of 10 for our handling of this situation. So there was comments in there that our core values are ambition, innovation, and collaboration. And we've had to really show all those attributes just to be in this situation. So our IT team have done a fantastic job enabling people to work from home. I've arguably got a better setup here from home than I actually did in the office. We've had, people dropping off desks at people's houses, people taking equipment out of the office, the tech support guys, even into the evenings providing support to make sure people were set up from home. Collaboration has been fantastic. So, the use of video conferences and speaking to people face to face multiple times a day, making sure that the setup meetings at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, and people talking across teams, across divisions, across countries has been great. And innovation, you've got to kind of make it up as you go, haven't you? So people are having to find solutions to things that we never actually thought were going to be problems. So sometimes it's easy not to be innovative when what you're doing is kind of working, right? When your back's against the wall and you've got two hands tied behind your back and you need to find a way, that's when innovation comes. So yeah, I'm really confident that our culture and our values will thrive really in this environment. So when the going gets tough, the tough get going, and as I say, we've operated within the culture of our business so far, and I envisage that continuing.
Okay, let me bring this to a close. It's gone very quickly. I don't know if it has for our panel members or indeed our audience, but certainly for me, it's gone very quickly. I would like to thank both Colin Monk from Manpower Group. Thank you very much for your openness and candidness about what's going on. And also to Gareth Morris from Evolution. I also want to thank Tania Bowers, who's been less busy actually on this call than with some, which were the panic calls about furlough or the panic calls about holiday schemes, whatever. I'm sure some of that's going to come back when we hear some new updated guidance. I want to thank our panel. Thank you very much. What I would also say is, please remember that this afternoon, we have at 2 o'clock a question and answer session with Graham Mitchell, which is looking at people. He's a business psychologist looking at people, dealing with people and how we can look after our staff at this moment in time. And then Thursday at 2 o'clock, we have Sid Barnes and Wendy Merricks looking at diversification of your business. It may be that this is the time to have a little look, to look for a bit of innovation and step outside your comfort zone, or plan to when the market comes back fully, but to have a look. And these guys will give some kind of information with regard to that. I thank you for my panel. I really do, for giving us time and for their openness. And I thank everybody for listening. Do stay safe. And I suppose stay alert as well. Take care. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Anne.
Thank you.